Well, good morning, everyone. Um, this is probably the reason I'm wearing a coat and tie today, is Martin and Amy both have been gracious to give me some time to share some thoughts with you this morning. And it is with my practice always growing up, you always wore a suit, white shirt, and a dark tie, or a fancy tie to church. So I'm just sort of carrying on a family tradition. But this morning, as I'm sitting in my dining room now, looking out at the backyard, and this is one of those cold mornings. And as I heard Kristen say, it was zero, and she doesn't live too far from me, so I guess it was zero out there. But I love to see the sun come up on a day like today. The air is cold, it's crisp, and there's snow on the ground, and it is so peaceful. And I usually, when I see a scene like this, think of Robert Frost. I don't know. I mean, he was a wonderful poet who lived in northern New England and spent, I know, a number of winters writing poetry, some beautiful stuff. But I also, at the same time, I've been watching something over the last several weeks that has always brought I think, a chuckle to my face, and this is there are three people. I don't know who they are. I think it's two men and a woman who sit out and have their coffee each morning, regardless of the weather or the temperature. They're outside of the bakery downtown, and they're bundled up, but they're going to have their coffee, and they're going to connect. They do run some risk with that, but they're willing to take that chance. But I thought to myself, boy, that is so typical of New England, and actually probably other parts of the country. But they seem to be enjoying it, and I hope that I hope they're not out there this morning. It's just too darn cold. But those are kind of the things that I've been musing. But over the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 months during this pandemic, I've been thinking a lot about connections. We're connecting in a due way. I think if any of us have been told a year ago that this is what we'd be doing in 2021, we'd probably told them, you're crazy. That'll never happen. Well, it has happened. So we're finding new ways to connect. And as I was thinking about that, I ran across this call to worship. And it was written by somebody, I don't know who they are. It's Abby, I think, Abby Willeroo. And it was used in a service that we do each week with our student interns over at Beverly Hospital, and that is to pause at noontime and have a short interfaith period of worship with some prayers and poetry and some thoughts. And this happened to be one that was done, I think, in 2019. And I ran across this in my files, and I used it because it talks about this area of connections. And the next thing I did is I thought, well, if we're looking at that, what does the sacred scripture say to us about connections? And I looked around and, I came upon this passage that's always been curious to me. And earlier on, when I was in college and studied it in some year-long course in the Old and New Testament that I took, I got a better understanding of it. And I begin to see it in real life and how we are tempted. Well, we're tempted through connections in a lot of places, connecting with people and with things. And so that's the background to this particular sermon. And recently, I saw an example of this connection, and I saw it you may have seen it too. It was back, I think, in early January on CBS Good Morning, and it featured a story about preschool kids talking to Elmo of Sesame Street about their feelings on the pandemic. And this was a group of kids that came on, they were all on Zoom, and when they saw Elmo was there, they started doing this, and they got up and they wiggled, and there was just a lot of energy there. I mean, they were excited to see Elmo and to see their friends. Some of them were friends, some of them weren't, but to see other people. And so there followed a discussion on, how are you feeling about things and about the pandemic? And there were several questions, that they were interested in, but one really stuck out. A little girl named Rona said, basically, how do you stand not being able to touch your friends? And Elmo said, well, it's hard, but we have to do it. And what I do is a little crazy dance, waving my hands. And that's the way I overcome this feeling of not being able to touch. But that's a big problem. We're used to, as humans, touching each other, hugging each other, shaking hands, kissing each other, and we're not doing that. And it's been a trial for a lot of people. I came from a family that didn't do a lot of touching and kissing and so forth, but later in life, Linda taught me how to hug and how to kiss and how to just be there to greet our friends. And that's been a big help for me. But I feel like now I'm kind of out on a desert, like Jesus was when he went, into the wilderness. And I feel sure a lot of you are feeling the same way. But as we look at this passage, Jesus, prior to going into the wilderness, was baptized by John the Baptist. And this was a very up moment for Jesus because he knew that he was the Father's son, and he was expected to come and walk among us, teaching us how to love and be compassionate. And this moment was immediately followed by going into the wilderness. And what a way to go. You're very high, and we've all had this experience. We've been on top of the world one day, and the next day, our world is falling apart. And we've gone into wilderness. This church, if those of you that were here prior to Martin, we were in wilderness for 10 years. There was a little break when Kathy came and was our pastor, but she prepared the way for Martin, who is among us now. And we came out of wilderness. I would call that time of Kathy Ryan as a pause. And it was a tough time for those of you that were around. We questioned a lot of things about what we are, what we do. And we came out of it. And we've been blessed with this ministry of not only Martin, but Amy, and they have been among us now, teaching us, being with us. And it's been a gift that has been given to us. But we will face other times of being in the wilderness. This past year, we've been in the wilderness. There have been times of confusion. There's been times of changes on a moment's notice, kids being taught from home through Zoom, meetings postponed or canceled. Most people haven't been out to have a nice meal in a restaurant probably since last January. We were facing all kinds of challenges. And quite honestly, at this point, I think we'd all agree that we're in pandemic fatigue. And this is affecting all of us. But there is hope. And as you look at what we've been through, think back to the early days of trying to get this Zoom service started. I mean, it was a challenge. And we have some very dedicated people who said, relax, we'll take care of it. Another gift given to us as a congregation. And then we've had to cancel some meetings and, on some of our programming, but we're still active. The Board of World Missions is working very hard with their projects. We have this new spreader that Dolly has been working with to spread the word. And we've got any number of things going on. And it's because of our staff and the support we give them and our energy. Even though we're under pandemic fatigue, somehow we're getting that energy together. This service that we have on Zoom has improved greatly. We're getting new equipment, which is sorely needed, so we can expand this service and have it more reliable. So that's been the good things that have come out of who we are. But there are things to come. I mean, we got a new form of leadership on the national scene. We've got any number of projects going. We've got the vaccine out now, and people are getting vaccinated, but there's still, controversy. There's still things going on that we have to be alert to. We're experiencing right now in this state some confusion over who gets the vaccine and who doesn't at this time. The state chose not to open it up to everyone at once and have chaos, but to do it in phases. And this is not a political sermon by any means, but these are the things that we are facing. And during this time that we're in wilderness, we're learning things. That's the great thing about wilderness. It's a time of deep reflection of who we are and where we're going. We've all had all kinds of wildernesses in our life. Those of us that went to college, boy, I don't know about you, but I was in wilderness for about a whole semester when I was in college, that first semester. I didn't know what to expect. And it was a series of trials, successes and some failures. But there are all kinds out there. One of the areas that temptation is always available, and we've probably all experienced it, is when we decide to go on a diet. Now, this is the time of year after Christmas when that becomes a big thing. Okay, I've had all the fun I can have. Even this year where we had restrictions, I think people were able to have some fun. I'm going to lose some weight. Well, that starts off very diligently, but by Valentine's Day, it's gone by the board. But that's temptation for each of us personally. I heard a story recently about a 300-pound man that he decided finally he had to get this weight off if he wasn't going to continue to live a lively and productive life. So he had this gastric bypass surgery. The surgeon did his work. And a couple of days later, he was in the hospital feeling pretty good. So he got up and took a walk down the hall from his room. And as he turned a corner, there it was, temptation. It was in the form of a refrigerator full of snacks and food for the patients. Well, you know what happened. He ate everything in sight. Later in the day, he became sick, and the surgeon found out what was going on. So he had to do emergency surgery. And the man, instead of spending 3 or 4 days in the hospital, he spent a month. But get this, after he got out, he sued the hospital. And he sued it for $9 million. Now, I don't know how this case was settled, but in his suit, he stated the hospital knew that he'd had gastric bypass surgery. The nurses knew, the doctors knew, and it was their responsibility to get him to stop. Well, temptation takes all forms, folks. But, and as I said, I really don't know what happened there. But in today's scripture, you know, it comes from Matthew, and just to give you a little bit of a synopsis of what's going on at the time Matthew was written. It was written after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. This was the second destruction. The first one was when the Babylonians came and took the Jewish people to Babylonia and destroyed the temple. And so this was the time that the second one was completely destroyed. They left the Jewish folks in place. But Titus, who became emperor, was the Roman general that committed this act. So this was a period around 70 AD when the land of Israel was in turmoil. There were constant problems with the Roman government. There were problems with the formation of the early church. There were a lot of things going on. And what happened, as we know in that story, and it's reflected in that story, is Jesus had to be prepared in that in the story to face some of these things during his lifetime. And so he went into the wilderness to study, to reflect, and get ready for his ministry. In today's world, this would probably be some sort of orientation training program in many businesses that we might be finding a job in. But he was tempted, and he was tempted 3 times. And they said, by the devil. And quite honestly, I'm not sure about I'm not really comfortable about seeing the devil depicted as a human being. I am probably coming more from a scientific background with this, in that, you know, there are things that go on in our lives that affect us, and when we are tempted. And then we're tempted because we have an ego, and we have an alternate ego, and they're constantly telling us what to do. And then we have to decide that. But, and that's basically what I think Jesus had to do. And he came out of that experience well prepared to do his work. Now, you know, he was tempted first time he was tempted with Jesus was hungry and without food. Well, he was also hungry for food of the soul. And that's what he was exhausted, he was tired, and that's when temptation appeared. And then he was challenged about worshiping himself instead of God. And the third one, he was tempted with harming people because of in the name of the Father. So those are the 3, and he successfully came out of that with denying the temptation. And as it said, is in the closing scripture, the angels came down and surrounded him. And I think that happens to some extent when we make some of these decisions. We sometimes have to go out on a limb to stay true to who we are. And we come out of that surrounded with this good feeling, this good spiritual feeling of who we are and what we can do. Well, in today's world, we're facing so many of the same things, probably in a larger degree than the people of the time of this book of Matthew was written. And there are many things going on in our lives now. And we know them, we've heard about them. They are a constant reminder when we're listening to news or reading newspapers or news magazines, however we get our communications. But we, as a church, I think are well suited to come out of this wilderness and do good things. Because I'm looking at you this morning, and you people are wonderful. You're kind, you're giving, you have a sense of humor, and you're with us all the way. I find great support from each and every one of you in my work in the hospital and in hospice. And I look forward to each Sunday to be with you, even though we're at a distance. And personally, I can't wait till we all get back together. I think we're going to have we're going to go out there on the fields, and we'll probably ruffle some feathers in the neighborhood, but we're going to have a love-in. And as a friend of mine used to say, he said, I just got to hug you. And he was a hugger from the word go. I knew him. Fortunately, he's passed away a few years ago. But he was, Charlie was one of these people that he would find this very difficult because he was somebody everybody knew, and he was supported, and he was loved by all of us. So as we come out of this, and we will, I just can't tell you when, but we will. We're going to be sitting, as another friend of mine says, sitting pretty and ready to go. And we're going to be able, as Rona asked, yes, Rona, we'll be able to touch each other. And as we come out of this, it's going to be like we're recovering from a long illness. For those of you that remember Shirley Mosier, a lifelong member of this church and was a wonderful, supportive member. I was talking with her one day, and she mentioned that she had had polio as a child, and she recovered pretty much. And I said, well, how did you feel when you were able to leave the bedside? She didn't have to be in an iron lung. Leave the bedside and come back in and see your friends. And she said, I was a little scared. I was very secure in my home and in the activities I was doing. And she said, I was a little scared to go to school. Maybe I'd have another attack. And I think that's what we're going to be initially. We're going to be a little hesitant when everything is, the all clear is given, so to speak. And when that is given, we'll be able to remove our mask and we'll be able to go out and socialize. And I have a suspicion it's going to take a little while. And as it takes a little while, let us remember that God is with us, He's for us, and He will be very supportive. And so with those thoughts, let us remember that we're here to be together, but to share the hope of the future. Are you ready? Amen.